A lot of what people know about the Old West comes straight from movies, dime novels, and TV tropes, not from how frontier life actually worked. In this video, we're breaking down 7 myths that still fool people today, from the idea that every town was pure chaos, to the way outlaws, lawmen, cowboys, and Native American history get oversimplified. Some of these myths sound believable because they're everywhere in pop culture, but the real facts are way more interesting and a lot more specific. Let's get into the first one. Number 1. The West was pure chaos. People picture the Old West as a non-stop free-for-all, where every street was basically a shooting range and nobody cared about rules. The reality is a lot more ordinary. Most frontier towns tried hard to look safe because safety meant business. Railroads, cattle markets, mines, and general stores all depended on predictable routines, signed contracts, and people feeling comfortable enough to spend money. That meant ordinances, courts, and local politics, even if they were messy. Town councils wrote rules about things like firing guns inside city limits, carrying weapons on the main street, running horses too fast through town, gambling hours, and public drunkenness. People went to a justice of the peace over debts, property lines, and stolen livestock because legal paperwork mattered when land and money were on the line. Many wild towns also had rules about guns inside town limits. In several cattle towns, visitors were expected to check their weapons when they arrived, especially near busy business districts, and marshals could fine people for carrying. Enforcement wasn't perfect, but the point is that the idea of no laws is mostly a movie shortcut. Another thing that gets lost is how different places were from each other. A boom town full of miners could be rough for a while a farming town nearby might be quiet and family-oriented.
Some places had real spikes of violence, especially when a brand new town exploded overnight, but plenty of communities were focused on schools, churches, newspapers, and keeping order. Even when trouble happened, it usually involved a small number of repeat offenders, not a whole population constantly fighting. So if you imagine the entire West as one giant outlaw camp, you miss what made the frontier work at all. Most people wanted rules, and they spent a lot of time building them. That misunderstanding leads straight into another big myth. Because if you assume the place was lawless, it's easy to assume the average working guy was armed and dangerous too. Number 2. Cowboys were basically outlaws. The word cowboy sounds like a personality type now, like it automatically means a tough, trigger-happy drifter. Historically, it was a job title, and not a glamorous one. A working cowboy was a wage laborer paid to handle cattle and horses, often doing long, repetitive work for months at a time. Think more outdoors employee than gunslinger. On a cattle drive, the biggest threats were weather, stampedes, injuries, exhaustion, and losing animals, not constant fights with bandits. A typical drive meant riding long hours, taking turns on night watch, finding water, keeping the herd moving, and doing boring but important tasks like mending tack and caring for horses. The skills that mattered most were riding, roping, reading the land, and staying calm under pressure. Yes, cowboys carried firearms sometimes, but mostly as tools for dealing with predators, putting down injured animals, or general protection in remote areas. The gun as identity thing comes later, boosted by dime novels and then Hollywood. It also hides where cowboy culture actually came from. A lot of what people call classic cowboy gear traces back to Spanish and Mexican vaquero traditions, roping techniques, saddles, spurs, chaps, and even parts of the vocabulary. And cowboys weren't one single type of person. The workforce included white Americans, Mexican and Mexican-American riders, black cowboys, and native cowboys,
especially in the cattle regions where ranching was a major industry. When you picture a cowboy as one narrow stereotype, you miss how much the job was shaped by different cultures working the same range. Another detail people skip: many cowboys were young, and many didn't do the job for life. Some worked a few seasons, saved what they could, and moved on. So the next time you see the cowboy equals outlaw idea, remember, most cowboys were trying to keep a herd moving and get paid, not pick fights.
And speaking of fights, there's one specific scene everyone expects from the Old West, even though it almost never happened the way people think. Number 3. High noon duels were common. The classic image is two men squaring up in the middle of the street, hands hovering over their holsters, waiting for the clock to strike noon. It's one of the most recognizable Western tropes, and it's also wildly misleading. Real violence on the frontier was usually quick, close, and unfair. More like sudden ambushes, arguments that escalated fast, or people getting shot from cover. A formal "I'll see you at noon" duel required both sides to agree, show up, and risk being arrested, which wasn't a great plan for anyone who wanted to stay alive or stay free. And the gear people imagine isn't quite right either. The super low, tied down, fast draw holster you see in movies is mostly a later style. In the 1800s, a lot of people carried a handgun higher on the belt, in a coat pocket, or in a more practical holster meant for riding, not quick drawing for a crowd. When documented gunfights did happen, they often involved multiple people, bad visibility, alcohol, and confusion, not neat choreography. Even one of the most famous shootouts, the conflict associated with Tombstone and the OK Corral, wasn't a clean duel in the corral at noon. It was a short, chaotic exchange near that area, sparked by tensions over weapons and local politics. In real self-defense situations, people also didn't always rely on a revolver. A shotgun was common for guarding a stagecoach, protecting a store, or defending a home, because it was straightforward and powerful at close range. Another reason the high noon myth sticks is that it makes violence feel like a sport with rules. That's easier to watch than the truth, which is that frontier violence, when it happened, was often about grudges, fear, or control, and it could hit bystanders. Communities didn't celebrate that. They usually tried to prevent it with curfews, gun ordinances, and arrests for disturbing the peace. So if you want a more accurate picture, swap the tidy duel for something less cinematic. Short-range, messy incidents that towns tried to shut down quickly. Once you drop the high noon fantasy, the next myth gets easier to see too. Because Hollywood didn't just invent the gunfight, it also invented how law enforcement worked. Number 4. Lawmen were lone superheroes. Movies love the image of a single, fearless lawman walking into danger with a badge and a steady aim. In real life, law enforcement in the Old West was a mix of local and federal roles, and it leaned heavily on teamwork and community pressure. A sheriff usually worked for a county and was often elected. A town marshal or city police force handled local ordinances. U.S. Marshals and their deputies dealt with federal cases across large territories. These jobs came with paperwork, serving warrants, guarding prisoners, collecting taxes, and dealing with everyday disputes, things that don't look exciting on screen. Jails were small, courts might meet only at certain times, and a lot of crime fighting was basically making sure witnesses showed up and cases didn't fall apart. When a serious arrest had to be made, lawmen often relied on deputies and posses, meaning temporary groups of locals who helped search for suspects or keep the peace. That system could be effective, but it also meant enforcement depended on who in the community was willing to cooperate and on local politics. It's also important to remember that lawman didn't automatically equal good guy. Some were brave and principled. Others were corrupt, violent, or closely tied to powerful business interests. The same town could swing between strict enforcement and looking the other way, depending on who was in charge and who had influence. And outside official lawmen, private detectives and security forces played a role too. Railroads, banks, and express companies sometimes hired agents to track thieves and protect shipments. So, the real story isn't one lone hero cleaning up a town with perfect aim. It's a system that mixed elections, courts, deputies, citizen participation, and sometimes private money. That more complicated setup matters because it changes how you understand outlaws as well.
If you imagine the West as a simple battle between one good sheriff and one bad bandit, it's easy to fall for the next myth. Number 5. Outlaws were Robin Hood types. A lot of famous outlaws are remembered like rebellious celebrities, bold, charming, maybe even secretly helping the poor. The truth is usually less flattering. Most outlaw careers were short, stressful, and built around theft, intimidation, and escape. Robbing a stagecoach or a train wasn't some elegant stunt. It was high risk, and it could go wrong fast. Even when an outlaw targeted a bank or a company payroll, the money still came from workers, towns, and customers. People got hurt, and families paid the price, even if the legend later cleaned it up. So where did the folk hero image come from? Part of it was branding before branding was a thing. Newspapers sold stories, and editors loved dramatic characters. Dime novels turned criminals into larger-than-life figures with catchphrases and moral codes. Supporters also had reasons to romanticize certain outlaws, especially in places where politics after the Civil War created bitter loyalties. But the "they only robbed the rich" claim rarely holds up when you look closely. In many cases, outlaws stole horses and cattle, raided small stores, threatened witnesses, and relied on fear to keep people quiet. Technology also made the famous outlaw lifestyle harder than people think. Once telegraph lines and rail networks spread, news of a robbery could travel quickly, and lawmen could coordinate across towns in ways earlier generations couldn't. That's one reason so many gangs burned bright and then disappeared. They were hunted, captured, or killed, and the legend kept going long after the real group was gone. The West also had plenty of fraud that doesn't show up in movies. Land scams, fake mining shares, rigged games, and forged documents. Those crimes didn't look like masked riders, but they could wipe out someone's savings just as effectively. When you strip away the legend, most outlaws look less like freedom fighters and more like people gambling with other people's lives. And that leads into another area where popular stories flatten reality. Who the conflicts were about and who gets portrayed as the threat. Number 6. Native Americans were one enemy. Old Western stories often treat Native Americans as a single group with a single motive, usually framed as the obstacle to settlement. That's not history. That's a stereotype. In the 1800s, there were hundreds of distinct native nations and communities across North America, each with its own languages, leaders, economies, and relationships with neighboring peoples. Some relied heavily on hunting, others farmed, others combined both, and many adapted quickly to new conditions, including horses, trade routes, and new technologies.
Their relationships with the United States also varied widely. Some negotiated treaties and tried to protect land through diplomacy. Some fought to resist invasion and forced removal. Some made alliances with the U.S. against rival groups, and many individuals worked as scouts because it offered a way to protect their families in impossible circumstances. None of that fits the simple, good settlers versus bad tribes storyline. Another big piece people miss is the scale of pressure pushing westward. Railroad expansion, mining booms, and the destruction of key resources like bison herds. Add broken treaties, forced marches, and reservation policies, and you get a picture that's about displacement and survival, not a movie villain attacking for no reason. Violence happened on all sides, and it was often tied to land and retaliation cycles. But painting one side as a single enemy erases the human reality and the political choices that drove the conflicts. It also erases native life beyond war. Native communities traded, farmed, raised families, practiced religion, debated strategy, and built a new. When you keep that in mind, the Wild West looks less like a simple battlefield and more like a crowded, changing place where different societies collided. And the everyday places where people actually spent most of their time, like saloons, also get distorted by the same kind of simplified storytelling. Number 7. Saloons were non-stop brawls. The saloon is basically the movie symbol for the Old West. Swinging doors, a line of tough guys at the bar, someone getting thrown through a window, and a piano playing in the background. Real saloons were businesses, and most business owners didn't want their place wrecked every night. Many saloons were closer to social clubs than fight pits. They were places to get a meal, hear news, find work, make deals, and meet friends after long days of labor. Depending on the town and the clientele, a saloon might be rough, or it might be surprisingly polished, with mirrors, carved wood, and strict house rules. Some were attached to hotels and worked like today's hotel bars. A fun detail that surprises people is the free lunch tradition. In many places, you could buy a drink and get access to a spread of food, which was a smart way to keep customers around, even if the food was salty on purpose. Not every drink was straight whiskey either. Beer was common, and so were mixed drinks, especially as bottled spirits and commercial breweries expanded. Saloons also varied a lot by region and by law. Some towns had dry periods, where alcohol sales were restricted or banned, and some had curfews or rules about gambling. The famous swinging doors weren't universal. Many places used regular doors, and the half-door style showed up more in certain climates and building designs than Hollywood suggests. Entertainment was real, but it didn't always mean constant fistfights. You could find card games, billiards, music, and sometimes organized shows, along with separate spaces like dance halls or gambling rooms. And while Western stories often act like towns were only men, women were present in many ways, running boarding houses, working in family businesses, teaching, working in theaters, managing properties, and in some cases even owning or managing hospitality businesses. The more accurate picture is that saloons were just one piece of frontier town life, sitting alongside churches, schools, newspapers, fraternal groups, and local politics. In practice, a saloon survived by staying open, paying fees, and not letting chaos drive customers away. So real saloon life was usually more regulated than the movie version.